It's no secret that the 1990s through the 2000s was one of the most important and beloved eras for children's entertainment. Pixar was in their prime, putting out classic after classic. Nickelodeon was pumping out most of their iconic shows that they're still remembered for today, and the Cartoon Network was still the beloved Cartoon Network that you remember. At the top of its game, even serving as a gateway to weebdom with their Toonami anime block.
Uploading video for broadcast. Alright, Tom, we're ready.
I love this job.
Yeah, that's a hint of nostalgia right there. This era was defined by its edge, though. Tim Burton and Johnny Depp ruled movie theaters with movie after movie. Some great and some not so much. Survival horror was also at its peak of popularity, with Resident Evil just getting into its action horror phase, and the less than accurate film adaptations playing in theaters everywhere. And even outside of just the horror-tinged side of things, media in general was in its very own attitude era. It was full of shock and spectacle. No matter what the medium was or the age demographic it was targeting, things were getting darker, grittier, more mean-spirited, or I guess just grittier. I used the word already, but that's the best way I can define it. Whether it was fun, tongue-in-cheek stuff, something that was somber and heart-pulling, or even something that was action-focused or traditional horror, all of it was getting darker. And this is a huge reason as to why this era is so fondly remembered, because it pushed boundaries and played into themes that were previously reserved for more adult or a lot more serious stories. And culturally, the darkness had rarely been dominant as a mainstream force outside of the aforementioned more serious forms that it took. But if there was one specific flavor of edge that was most common and most palpable during this time period, it would actually be children's horror media. Shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark and the book series Goosebumps opened up the floodgates, and as their popularity shined, so did the gold in the eyes of every executive who began to greenlight as much horror-themed media for kids as they could, and the boom would start. Now, to be fair, this wasn't just some soulless attempt at making money either. Children's horror really was a big deal. I mean, in the 90s, one of the most popular book series was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which, beyond its childishly creepy stories, had art that, even as an adult, looks terrifying to me. And despite the childhood trauma, it was a great time to be a kid, because the creativity and general quality of media from this era was on another level. But that's an entire rabbit hole of its own. Rather, for today, I want to talk about one specific trend that happened during this time, and that would be the phenomenon of horror cartoons.
We interrupt this program to bring you Courage the Cowardly Dog Show!
The late 90s began a trend that would dominate for a damn near decade, and that was cartoons aimed at kids with themes of the macabre, goth-style aesthetics, and humor based around the things typically used to terrify. And while that might seem like a recipe for absolute disaster, it was actually really good. And like any good thing, it couldn't last forever. And so just as quickly as it showed up, it would fade away, leaving a void that's never really been filled since. So with that being said, why don't we talk about the lost art of horror cartoons?
Scooby-Doo.
Alright, so in order to start this off, we have to talk about the granddaddy of all of this, and that's Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo was a show that started airing back when your grandparents' parents were kids. It's one of the longest lasting franchises of all time, and as silly as that might sound considering its premise, it's ultimately a timeless show because of said premise. Slapstick humor surrounding adventurous teens is a tried and true formula, and with its sense of humor and iconic characters, it lives in the same realm as something like The Peanuts or Looney Tunes. A timeless classic that stayed a staple of children's lives for many generations past its initial shelf life. But to call it a horror cartoon is quite a bit of a stretch. Scooby-Doo is a very simple premise for a series. You have some 60s teenagers loading up in their van with their talking dog, each being a social archetype for the time period, and they go all around town trying to find proof of the paranormal and investigate the uncanny. But where the formula really sets in is that the endpoint was almost always the same. The most pressing and prominent theme of Scooby-Doo was that monsters didn't exist. Every supposed evil creature or haunting ghost was just a bad man in a mask. And this was to teach children not to fear monsters under their bed, and instead be more skeptical, and when they do come across an evil monster or a scary story, to suspect that that evil or danger that they're encountering is more than likely at the hands of a person. And while this is a fun little moral to teach young children, the problem was that the show went on for God knows how many decades, and that never changed. That premise stayed exactly the same as it was from day one. But come the 90s, everything would change, and Scooby-Doo would, just like it did in the 60s, change cartoons forever by really popularizing a new idea. And that idea would be children's horror, genuine children's horror. And that was all done with one little movie known as Scooby-Doo Zombie Island.
There are monsters who dwell in our nightmares. Creatures of unspeakable horror, plotting to destroy mankind. But in this world, there are warriors who have the courage to confront this evil.
Well, to be fair to other shows that had come along and shown real danger and overt monsters and characters before, this was the first time something really walked the tightrope of children's entertainment meant to elicit the whimsical and actual dread from monsters who could do harm. Here, the zombies were real, and they were a definite danger for the time. But because it's Scooby-Doo, the movie never devolves into straight up horror or childhood trauma territory. And that's something that I want to bring up here. There were plenty of children's oriented or I guess marketed movies and cartoons at this point that had crossed the threshold into horror, but the difference was that Scooby-Doo, like I said before, actually walked the tightrope. It stayed grounded in children's media, whereas much of the other stuff was either raunchy shows that would play on the surreal like Ren and Stimpy, or it was just nightmare-fueled childhood trauma stuff that wasn't really meant for kids in the first place, like Watership Down. And that's because for the longest time, and even to this day, animation in the West, and especially America, is treated kind of as a weird taboo for adults to enjoy. You know, it wasn't until very recently that anime became normal for people to like in the mainstream. For the longest time, it was considered this dorky man-child thing that everyone shit on, and cartoons in general that were made here had to be for kids. Because anytime that something was an adult-oriented animated show or movie, 9 times out of 10, it was some stupid adult comedy where they just make sex jokes the entire time. You'd occasionally get something that was released straight to DVD, or an attempt at doing something that was a bit more for an older audience, like the movie 9. But for the most part, it's always existed in two realms. You have children's animation, which can be just about anything, but it's aimed at kids, or it's going to be Sausage Party. Yeah, fuck this movie, by the way. So, needless to say, it was revolutionary for its time, and something deeply needed to revive what was a super played out franchise for the era. And while Scooby-Doo from Zombie Island was far from the first movie to ever play with these themes, it was the movie that really solidified the genre of children's horror. And going forward, it would become more and more of a prominent piece of entertainment, especially in the animated realm. But as much work as it did do, there was a show that would come out just a year later that would arguably be the most important piece of the puzzle.
Courage the Cowardly Dog.
You can't really talk about children's horror without talking about Courage. In the realm of kids' scary cartoons, Courage the Cowardly Dog was to TV what Goosebumps was for books. It was the gateway for children to get hooked on horror. And Courage earned this by being hilarious, scary, and relatable all at the same time. The show is famous for a reason. Obviously, you have the nightmare fuel of its monsters that played a huge part in doing that, but something else that Courage had that most of the other shows I'm going to mention here didn't was true relatability. Courage, being the scared little guy that he is, while also being loyal enough not just to abandon his family, was extremely relatable to kids. Because that's how most children felt during their adolescence. I mean, hell, that's how I felt as a kid. I would be scared shitless of whatever imaginary monster I heard in the middle of the night. But I couldn't just abandon my family and run away. And that's probably how the majority of people felt as little kids, and this is exactly what makes Courage as relatable as he is. The mixture of raw fear and devotion to his family and to his caretakers is what makes Courage such a compelling show, and grounds it much more than anything else that we're going to talk about today. Now, for the 10 of you who haven't seen it, Courage the Cowardly Dog follows the Monster of the Week format, where each episode is self-contained. For the most part, at least. There are some villains who do make multiple appearances, but that is kind of a special case sort of thing. For the most part, the show uses this format to get the most out of itself, as it's not just a spooky monster story after spooky monster story. Courage would lean into all sorts of horror, and it would play with its themes, its tone, and its intentions episode by episode. Sometimes you got the more typical horror comedy setup like Courage Meets the Mummy, and other times you would get something that dipped into more heartfelt and meaningful territory with episodes like The Hunchback of Nowhere. The Hunchback of Nowhere is a short story about a disfigured hunchback looking for shelter in the rain, only to be mocked and rejected by Eustace. Courage ends up befriending the hunchback, and the two enjoy performing their bells together, and the kindness means a lot to this stranger. But things take a turn when Eustace comes back in and starts to harass Courage, and this is something that the hunchback sees and empathizes with, considering what he's been throughout his life. This helps develop a really strong bond between Courage and the hunchback, and it only gets stronger as the episode goes on and he's introduced to Muriel, Courage's mother. And she is, well, if you've seen the show, the embodiment of kindness and southern hospitality. And as you would expect, she befriends the hunchback as well, to the chagrin of Eustace, who can't stand it. The episode culminates in Courage and the hunchback performing once again together. Eustace, again, coming to berate and attack the both of them, and this leads to the hunchback giving him a taste of his own medicine and beating him up. With the episode wrapping up with the hunchback going on with his journey, now cherishing the newfound friends that he's made, and the rare kindness that he got to experience. Now, it's episodes like this that really made Courage different from most other children's horror, as it was able to play onto more serious themes and life lessons like this, and it never felt ham-fisted or forced. But on the other side of the coin, Courage the Cowardly Dog would also show some real-world evils and fears, and take things in a much darker direction. This is most prominent with the character Fred, who, let's just say, is a really great example here. Fred is Muriel's nephew, and in the show, he's this creepy man who has a compulsion to cut people's hair, and when he does, he gets uncomfortably excited about it, to the point where he likes to trap people into the situation and force a haircut onto them. Fred himself is someone who's been in and out of mental institutions and seems to take way too much pleasure in forcing haircuts onto his victims, while also playing into power dynamics with the people around him, manipulating and intimidating others so he can take full control at all times. I think it's pretty obvious what this character represents. He is an abuser, and more specifically, a sexual abuser. And while that's a really heavy topic to take on in a children's cartoon, again, this is what really set Courage apart from the pack and made it the king of horror cartoons. It wasn't afraid to touch serious subject matter, both heartfelt and terrifying, instilling messages that actually meant something to its viewers. Any adult who reminded a child of Fred would be a massive red flag, and while it's wishful thinking, if a child also empathized with the Hunchback, then maybe they would think twice before writing someone off for their looks or for just being a bit odd. And these powerful messages and explorations of adult themes through a child-friendly guise was what really separated Courage from everything else, and this was on top of what was already an extremely entertaining and funny show that just liked to scare you. I mean, we all remember this.
Return the slab.
What?
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
So tie all this together with some amazing sound design, creative uses of horror, and the show's ability to just become a fucking fever dream, I think it's obvious why Courage is an experience unlike anything else. And why, to this day, it's still a staple to anyone's childhood who got to see it.
Invader Zim.
Johnny the Homicidal Maniac is a 90s comic series focused around the titular serial killer and his murderous escapades. The series is both beloved and hated alike, usually at the same time by the same people, because it's a deeply flawed story with likable characters and great art. The book goes back and forth between serious instances of Nee debating on whether or not he should end his own life, deep instances of existential dread, and jumping to the conclusion where a simple cherry slushie makes the sunshine once again all right with the world. It's wacky, it's weird, and it's blood-soaked from end to end, with most of its humor coming from the contrast of the stupidity of the character and their childish and outlandish reactions to the brutal and downright Saw-level torture and death happening in front of them. JTHM would end up being an underground classic, garnering a cult following of edgy teens and goths everywhere, and not long after its release would spawn a sequel spin-off titled Squee, which focused on Nee's child neighbor Squee and the awful situations that he would always find himself in, holding an equally twisted humor and hysterics. Now, what does all this have to do with horror cartoons? Well, Nickelodeon would see both these comic books, look at Yonan Vasquez in the face and think, yeah, this guy should make a children's show. And that's how Invader Zim was born. Yonan Vasquez and his cynical and twisted sense of humor would spawn one of the most divisive yet important cartoons of the early 2000s. And that would be Invader Zim, a show that sits next to Courage the Cowardly Dog in terms of its popularity as a horror cartoon. And for good reason. The approach used is similar to what can be seen in most media that plays with the ideas of reverse horror. And if you don't know what that means, it is seeing the story through the monster's eyes. Though in the case of Zim, it's kind of in the middle, as we're following an alien invader on his quest of world domination. He's also a brain-dead moron, and more often than not is a victim to many of the horrors the show has to show us. And that's what made it so special. Invader Zim is downright iconic to anyone who grew up with it, myself included, and it's easy to see why. Like Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, Zim takes on a similar tone, just more subdued, but also not really. The show got away with some of the most twisted shit I've ever seen in a kid's show, like the episode Balonius Maximus, where Zim's main antagonist Dib discovers that throwing bologna at Zim causes it to burn and disfigure him, so Zim's response to the situation is to infect Dib with a DNA-shifting virus that will slowly turn him into a living piece of bologna. To which he tries to coax a cure out of Zim by infecting him with the same disease, and the episode ending with them failing to make a cure and fully transforming into living links of baloney. This is the perfect mixture of stupid, terrifying, and hilarious. It's metamorphosis, but with processed pig products instead of roaches. And it was this sort of dark, cynical humor that made the show what it is, by taking genuinely disturbing concepts and even straight up body horror and contorting it into pure stupidity that ultimately defangs what could be genuinely traumatic material for kids to see. But that's not to say that Zim was always just about being dark and twisted too. Like most cartoons, it was also just enjoyed for being stupid. Like the inclusion of the character Poop Dog, a ridiculous soda mascot who's just Snoop Dogg in a dog costume, acting as the Grim Reaper. Something that's so dumb to say out loud, but even all these years later makes me laugh just to think about.
Word up, kids! This is Poop Dog, the Poop Cola Gangsta Clown with a little fundraiser. Do you want to go magnet with the monies?
What does it mean?
Then jack this box of Poop Cola candy. It's the great taste of Poop Cola wrapped in a layer of chocolate badness.
Invader Zim lives on that tightrope, and it likes to cross lines all the time in regards of being terrifying and absolutely twisted, and so stupid you can't take it seriously. But that's not to say that it didn't cross into truly disturbing territory from time to time. The most famous example of this would probably be the infamous episode Dark Harvest, where upon having to go to the nurse's office, Dib taunts Zim with the fact that if he gets checked out by the nurse, they're going to find out that he doesn't have human organs. So, Zim's solution is simple. He starts stealing organs from his fellow schoolmates and replacing them with various items strewn about the school, which lightheartedly included a pigeon and downright sadistically included an explosive shock collar. This results in Zim becoming a deformed, bloated creature filled to the brim with children's organs. And I don't think it takes a genius to see just how fucked up this is. But that's Yonan Vasquez for you. Even in his children's cartoon, he can't help himself but sneak gore into it. I mean, just take a look at Bloody Gur. This was an Easter egg that they slipped into the show from time to time. That's just a drawing of Gur covered in blood. Though, if I were to pick an episode that really demonstrates the horror of Zim the best, it would actually be the episode Bestest Friend. As per usual with each episode, it's about Zim's outwardly terrible ruse to be human being noticed by most of the other kids, and him taking an exaggerated and terrible plan to prove them wrong way too far. In this case, he decides he needs a best friend in order to show that he isn't some weirdo loner, and does so by going to the reject table and selecting the ginger kid, Keith, to be his new best friend. But not before torturing the other kids. The result is an episode filled with Zim showing off Keith as his best friend, and once the charades are over, he tries to cut ties only for Keith, a lonely reject, never being able to catch the hint that he was just used. And Zim's response to deal with it by the end of the episode is...
Keith. Yes. Who's your best friend? That would be Zim.
Really, really cruel. And that cruelty is where the core of Invader Zim's horror comes from, in my opinion. Because while most children's cartoons want to have a positive message to tie themselves off with, Zim is borderline nihilistic in its approach, reveling in the cruelty of its horror and taking what could be horrible and terrifying situations and depicting them in the stupidest way possible, oftentimes leaving you with a bad ending for all parties involved. Something even Courage didn't dabble in as much.
Mr. Meaty.
When it comes to obscure and disturbing cartoons from the 2000s, no show is more infamous than Mr. Meaty.
All God's creatures
Mr. Meaty was a Canadian show animated using puppets, because nothing looks cuter than puppets that look designed to appear as ugly and stupid as possible. Airing originally on Nick before being thrown on Nicktoons, Nickelodeon's old side channel used for reruns and series they had no faith in. They did you so wrong, my sweet prince. The show was destined from its inception to be one of those bizarre memory holes that lives in people's minds for all the wrong reasons. Its premise was simple. Two teenage dimwits work at a fast food restaurant, and whether it be incompetence, puberty, general stupidity, or sometimes just unfortunate luck, something causes them to get into wacky shenanigans. So, the normal sort of thing that you would expect from a kid's show. Where Mr. Meaty likes to defy expectations is in just how fucking disgusting and outright terrifying it is at times. The entire show feels like a surreal fever dream to watch these days. And like the thing you could see in the background of a movie or video game, as a show one of the characters would watch, not as a real show that human beings would sit down and enjoy. In many ways, Mr. Meaty actually reminds me of the music of The Residents, where some of their more obtuse and weird releases like God in Three Persons contains this strange otherworldly feel to it, like something that shouldn't be real. And it's that uncanny kind of feeling that lies at the heart of Mr. Meaty and its gross out humor. While it may not be a horror cartoon in the traditional sense, don't get it twisted, Mr. Meaty was absolutely disturbing, especially for children. The show didn't just revel in gross out humor, but also sadistic torture of its main characters.
Thing's strong. What's going on? I don't know.
What was that?
I think that was my spine.
And obviously, there's also the tapeworm scene that's become infamous on the internet as well.
I've handled these little beauties before. Come on, sweetheart. Okay, come on. Here we go. Come on in. Oh, that's the stuff.
Or, you have this.
Just relax. Relax and just listen to my voice. Relax.
To put it simply, Mr. Meaty sold itself as a gross out series, but more accurately, was a cynical horror show that used much of its comedy to comment on the awful health practices of fast food, poor treatment of both customers and employees, and talk about the not-so-fun parts of growing up, all while mixing in some good old innuendos, shock humor, disturbing sections, and heart-sinkingly cringe situations. One way or another, the show is going to make you feel anxious and uncomfortable, and that's why Mr. Meaty, even though it looks far away from being anything related to horror, is one of the most traumatizing shows I have ever seen in my life.
The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy.
The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy is my all-time favorite cartoon. Not only was it my childhood, but it's one of those shows that really shaped me as a person. Now, I know that might sound stupid to some of you, but during its heyday, there was nothing else quite like it, even among the other Cartoon Network shows at the time that were dabbling in similar topics. It's a cartoon that constantly played with fire, taking folklore and mythology and twisting it to be the butt of juvenile and outright stupid humor.
A secret cave! Ha! Mandy, I found it! I do have a brain! Hi, brain! I miss you!
But that's what made it special. This was the era where you could make a silly show about King Tut existing in modern times as a lighthearted family show, or like we previously talked about, hire some edgelord whose only previous work was about serial killers and scared children, full of gore, profanity, and sacrilegious bile to make a TV Y7 hit. Billy and Mandy, however, took a very different approach from Zim and really every other show we've talked about. Sure, it would play on some dark themes revolving around death, hell, existentialism, and mean-spirited twists of fate, but at its core, it was a classic kind of Looney Tunes style cartoon. Not so much Bugs Bunny doing just physical comedy, but the mixture of physical comedy with the type of dialogue and personalities that you would only see in more vibrant cartoons of the past.
Don't worry about it, I'll get it. Honey! You're back. Are you feeling okay?
I'm wonderful. Never been better. I just needed a little vacation after my skeleton episode.
Dear, there's someone I'd like you to meet. This is Billy's friend, George. Or Grimy, or something.
Pleased to meet you, Grim.
Violent slapstick, essentially. Most of the times, plots are just simple build-ups to ironic or satirical jokes. And when things do get a bit more plot-centered and there's more going on, something absolutely stupid happens and it's the entire reason for the conflict or issue that fuels the episode. But that's sort of what makes Billy and Mandy so great. It carried that yin and yang of stupid and brilliant so well that it often bled together. I mean, just look at how they portrayed the Grim Reaper himself. Any other show would either do a generic Vincent Price wannabe, or they would try the whole dude bro style that Family Guy went with. But here, instead, they chose to have Grim be a Jamaican and play fully into those tropical roots.
Death always wins in the end.
Greg Eagles does the voice of Grim.
Dying is easy. Comedy is hard.
And I went in and auditioned for the part of Grim. They said they wanted someone to do the Grim Reaper. So I just came up with this deep voice.
Oh, now I'm just dying for revenge.
As the show went on, more overlapping plots and reoccurring characters and parodies of other popular media would become the norm. This thankfully didn't detract from the show's charm and most times even pushed it further. This is actually where a lot of the iconic characters remembered today came from. Characters like Fred Burger, Nurgle, and especially the best character in any cartoon, Hoss Delgado. A combination of Snake Plissken and Ash Williams. Now, unlike most of the shows I talked about, Billy and Mandy was less focused on being a true satire of culture like Zim or trying to teach people life lessons the way that Courage did. Rather, Billy and Mandy was predominantly just made to entertain by all means, and for that reason, it aged a lot better than most other shows did. Also, for most people who grew up with it, this was their introduction to Voltaire, so there's also that bit of lore. Now, there's a lot more I could go into here, but Billy and Mandy is my favorite cartoon, so I'm just gonna say, wait, a whole video about this show is coming soon. And there's a lot to talk about.
Making fees.
Now, so far we've talked about mostly classics that are all well remembered, but there were plenty of shows that weren't well remembered, that would just kind of pop up and then disappear without anyone really remembering or noticing. And this isn't exclusive to just the edgy, spooky, 3 Edgy 5 Me cartoons either. For every Ed, Edd and Eddy and Fairly Odd Parents, there would be shows like Chalk Zone and My Gym Partner's a Monkey. Now, each one of these that I mentioned was actually decently popular for their time, but for one reason or another, Chalk Zone and My Gym Partner's a Monkey were completely forgotten. So, if that's how the more mainstream shows of the era were treated, then how do you think some of the more niche shows revolving around horror and darkness were treated? Exactly, they fell into total obscurity, never to be spoken of or remembered again. The most popular of this category would probably be Real Monsters, one of Nickelodeon's older shows, and Mr. Meaty probably would be here too if it wasn't for just how traumatizing it was to kids, and that being why it's remembered. But there were plenty of other shows that could be included here as well, like Ruby Gloom or even Edgar and Ellen. But one of the most obscure yet infamous of this bunch would be the forgotten show Making Fiends.
Once there was a little girl, a girl who could make fiends. She kept the whole town terrified, the girl who could make fiends. Then there came another girl who wanted to be friends. Vendetta cannot stand her, so she plots her end.
Now, out of everything we've talked about today, Making Fiends is the most tame and intended for the youngest audience out of all of these shows. But that's the reason I chose to dig it up and show it off here. Even for media made for the youngest of audiences, the horror, or rather spooky themed genre, was being aimed at little kids. That's how much this whole theme defined the 2000s. So much so that a show like Making Fiends could be created, even though its concept was about evil people doing evil things just for the sake of making everybody around them miserable. Now, it's still probably more wholesome than whatever the fuck is being tossed onto the YouTube Kids app, which is saying a lot considering the creator of Making Fiends was part of the original crew who worked on South Park, but I digress. The show was cute and fun, but definitely something aimed at much younger kids, and as such, it lacks a lot of the substance the rest of the cartoons from this genre had. But even so, its art style was a lot of fun, and this remains a testament to just how popular this whole horror concept was. Again, the premise of the show is a little girl oblivious to the dangers around her moves to a town terrorized by a little girl who makes essentially demons and terrorizes everyone with them, and it's implied that she even kills people. But the real reason I actually brought Making Fiends up in this video is not really to talk about it so much, as it is to use it as an example of just how popular children's horror had gotten, but also that by this point we had reached stagnation. Making Fiends is equally famous for its existence as it is for its lack of existence, and what I mean by that is this is one of the hardest shows to get your hands on today. The handful of super fans of the show have archived it on YouTube and the Internet Archive, but outside of I think maybe one DVD release, Nickelodeon has more or less completely abandoned the show and never really speaks of its existence. And despite its decent popularity back during its time, it's a show that never got a third season and whose second season was mostly just compiled shorts. And that's because the winds of change were blowing. And I guess that really just brings us to our next point here. Stagnation and decay. The things that follow anytime something reaches its endpoint. Like anything that gets popular from a niche, its time in the sun rarely lasts forever, and more often than not, it ends up being forgotten and considered nothing other than a fad. And horror cartoons were just that. They were a fad. As much as me and probably anyone else who was a kid during this era loved this style of cartoon, as the 2000s came to a close, so did this era of edge and Halloween worship that had defined the previous 15 years. As we talked about in our previous video about mall goth, this was the same time that the entire mall goth era and the emo era was beginning to come to a close, as scene began to eclipse it and shed its goth-clad skin as we began to enter the 2010s. Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon had both become more focused on live-action shows during this time period, with their cartoons of this era being much more lighthearted and colorful as well. And in general, the landscape of media was just changing form. This was the period of time when the dreaded millennial writing trend would start to rear its ugly head, and the indie hipster wave of music and internet culture would begin to take over. But I didn't bring this up just to talk about the stagnation and decay of horror cartoons. Actually, I brought it up because despite the mainstream and the typical media that we consume coming to shed its skin during this era, There was a new form of media that was rising, and despite the changing seasons, was a place where the gloomy side of media would still stand strong. And that was all thanks to a little website that we all know and love. While the mainstream and the big media companies were moving on to greener pastures, the internet was doing what it does best, and that was carrying the full culture of the Western world on its back, for better and for worse. A lot of this was thanks to websites like 4chan and obviously Newgrounds, and both of these websites are a little bit too big for the scope of this video, so we're going to focus on the more mainstream side of things when a little website known as YouTube came to be. One of the first big memes on YouTube was Charlie the Unicorn.
Yeah, Candy Mountain, right. I'm just gonna, go back to sleep now.
No, Charlie, you have to come with us to Candy Mountain. Yeah, Charlie, Candy Mountain. It's a land of sweets and joy.
If you don't know what this is, then I'm going to assume that you're either a literal baby or just some hipster that's allergic to the 2000s. Now, Charlie was mostly a harmless nonsense cartoon that very much embodies the time that it came out of. The lol-so-random humor, the sarcastic characters, the annoyance factor, it was all there. And while this doesn't really have much to do with horror cartoons themselves, this was a gateway to them, and the reason why is all due to its creator. Charlie the Unicorn was created by Film Cow, and if you were to jump to their channel, you'd be met with some other cartoons that fit a lot more closely with horror. One of my favorites is The Cloak, a 10-minute show about a Grim Reaper-like figure and a disembodied head with a retractable spine. The entire thing is an over-the-top comedy video showing these would-be creepy figures personified as wacky cartoon characters thrust into ridiculous situations. And it's also very Invader Zim in its approach and sense of humor.
You!
Yes, me! Can I help you?
Are you the CEO of Toy Barn?
That I am. I'm enjoying my window.
And that's what you get. You get my acts of capitalism right in your face.
Yeah, like I said, it's very Invader Zim, but still, it's a lot of fun in its own right. And when I was just a little kid seeing this shit, and not a particularly brave kid, mind you, it demystified what I was seeing with its silliness. I mean, just look at this. It's disgusting, but again, the childish humor and the pure stupidity of it just defangs any real horror or gross out that it could have. It all just numbs you into the violence and horror of it all. But The Cloak isn't actually why I brought up Film Cow. It just happens to be a really good example here. And I also just have no idea if I'll ever have another chance to talk about it. Rather, I brought up Film Cow because alongside his silly videos and occasional dips into darkness like Mittens, he had one video that scared the absolute shit out of me as a little kid.
La 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 la, I love everyone. Yay! La 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 la, la 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 la. Hello, Timmy. I'm Mr. Happy Face.
Are you going to be my new friend?
I'm going to cut your throat open and use your blood as syrup on my pants.
This fuck-ass piece of animation is nothing these days. But as an unassuming child who just watched the pinnacle of cool cartoons in 2008, Charlie the fucking Unicorn, seeing this cynical shit just after, assuming it's going to be another lol-so-random video, was the kind of cynical wake-up call that made me into the prick that I am today. Look, I know I was a complete wuss as a kid, I admit it. But for fuck's sake, this is how it ends.
I'm cutting you, Timmy. You're so soft. Look how easily my knife is cutting you, Timmy. Your blood is so sweet, Timmy. Taste your blood, Timmy.
And that was just how YouTube and even Newgrounds was during this era. You would get some silly, funny animations only to click on another and be met with something you weren't expecting. The only difference was on YouTube it would be salad fingers, and on Newgrounds it would be a Zone parody turning your childhood memories into fetishes. And speaking of salad fingers, that's probably the best place to end things off here, because salad fingers and David Firth's content in general was the logical conclusion to horror cartoons. If you grew up enjoying any of these shows, the black comedy and disorienting and uncomfortable nature of Salad Fingers was the culmination of all of it. It might not seem like that big of a deal today, but back in the late 2000s, Salad Fingers was huge. The gross out, creepy vibe of it just resonated, and its nightmare fuel art style was a perfect blend of amateur and well-made, blurring it into this uncanny quality that made it pop even more than if it was super polished. Now, if you have yet to watch Salad Fingers, I won't spoil it here, as it's both a time capsule of a series and just a great watch for anyone who's into any of what we've talked about here today. So do yourself a favor and head over to David Firth's channel if you want to see it. But I digress. This tradition of making edgy, fucked up, and at times horrifying cartoons hasn't been lost to the clean corporization of YouTube either. It's definitely not as popular or prominent as it was in the 2000s, but I mean, some of the biggest animation channels today are people like Flashgits or Meat Canyon. And I don't think I really need to delve all that far into those for you to know just how over the top and horrifying both of those channels can get when they want to. I mean, just look at Meat Canyon. The man makes nightmare fuel. It's his thing. And honestly, it's some of the funniest stuff on the platform as well. So while horror cartoons are not nearly the giant or the juggernaut that they were in the past, they are still alive and well today. And you can find them if you go looking for them. I'm only scratching the surface here in this video. But it is a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a while because, well, that's my childhood, and sometimes I like to indulge in a little bit of nostalgia and going down memory lane. So what's the point of this whole video? I don't know, man. It's in the title. I just miss these shows and I miss this style, and I wanted to kind of yap about it for an hour. So I hope you enjoyed, and if you've never delved into horror cartoons, then do yourself a favor and jump into any of the shows I recommended here today. And if you like those, keep digging, because there's a lot of gold to be found in the past. Now, before you go, this is my wall of shame. The list of names who donate and keep this channel running, as if I wouldn't make the videos regardless. All jokes aside, I can't thank them enough for their support. It means the world, and I'm glad to keep entertaining you all. I am working on quite a bit of stuff. Things have slowed down a little bit now that we're past the Halloween season. I tried to get quite a bit of content out for the month. I know this video came, the day after Halloween, but hope you enjoy regardless. It's almost always spooky season, scary time over here, so it's not like there's much difference with October for me. I just, I like the excuse. So I got plenty more content coming your way, and if you'd like to support, links to my Patreon are down below, and for a one-time donation, coffee is there as well. But with that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.